Alex had always been fascinated by the mysterious and the unexplained. As a young teen, he often found himself drawn to ghost stories and urban legends, but none intrigued him more than the tale of the old asylum on the outskirts of town. The Asylum of Shadows, as it was ominously called by the locals, had been abandoned for decades. Stories about it were whispered in hushed tones, speaking of dark corridors, eerie noises, and shadows that seemed to come to life. It was said that the asylum was once a place for those deemed mad by society, a place where the unwanted were sent to be forgotten. However, the asylum's history was shrouded in more than just tales of madness. Strange disappearances, unexplained deaths, and rumors of cruel experiments conducted within its walls added layers of fear and mystery. People claimed that the shadows within the asylum were not mere tricks of the light, but were alive with malevolent intent. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alex decided to explore the asylum for himself. His curiosity had reached a tipping point, and he felt a strange pull towards the place. Armed with only a flashlight, a notebook, and his courage, he set off on his bike towards the outskirts of town. The ride was longer than he remembered, and as he pedaled, the houses grew sparse, and the trees seemed to close in around him, casting long, creeping shadows on the path. When Alex finally reached the asylum, he paused to take in its haunting presence. The building loomed ahead, its once grand facade now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The windows, long shattered, stared down at him like empty eye sockets, and the iron gate, rusted and hanging ajar, groaned in the wind. A chill ran down Alex's spine, but he shook off the feeling of unease and pushed his bike through the gate. The yard was a tangled mess of weeds and broken stones. An old fountain, now dry and cracked, stood at the center, its stone figures covered in moss. Alex could almost hear the whispers of the past as he approached the asylum's entrance. The large wooden doors, once sturdy and imposing, were now rotting and barely held together by their hinges. With a deep breath, Alex pushed them open and stepped inside. The air inside the asylum was cold and stale, and a musty smell permeated the hallways. Alex switched on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were lined with peeling paint and old, faded pictures of stern-looking doctors and their unfortunate patients. The floor creaked under his feet, and the sound echoed eerily in the silence. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he ventured further into the asylum. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the shadows were following his every move. But he was determined to uncover the secrets of the Asylum of Shadows. With each step, the darkness seemed to grow thicker, and the sense of dread more palpable. Little did he know, he was about to discover that some stories were better left untold. As Alex moved deeper into the asylum, the dim light from his flashlight revealed more of the decaying interior. The hallway stretched ahead like a dark tunnel, with doors on either side leading to various rooms and wards. Alex hesitated, feeling a prickle of fear, but his curiosity urged him forward. He approached the first door on his right, its paint chipped and peeling. With a trembling hand, he pushed it open. The room inside was small and cluttered with old furniture covered in dust. An overturned chair lay in the corner, and a broken bed frame leaned against the wall. Papers were strewn across the floor, yellowed with age. Alex knelt down and picked up one of the documents. It was a patient file, detailing the treatment of someone named Emily. The handwriting was neat but had a frantic quality to it, as if the person writing it had been in a hurry or under duress. Just as Alex was about to read more, he heard a faint whisper behind him. He spun around, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room, but there was no one there. His heart raced, and he could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He told himself it was just the wind, or maybe an animal scurrying through the old building. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. Leaving the room, Alex continued down the hallway. Each step echoed in the silence, amplifying his sense of isolation. He glanced at the doors as he passed, wondering what stories they held, what secrets they kept. The further he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air seemed thicker, colder, and the shadows grew darker. At the end of the hallway, Alex came to a large double door marked Main Ward. He hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The sight that greeted him was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The ward was a vast, open space filled with rows of rusty beds and tattered curtains. Broken medical equipment lay scattered around, and the ceiling was dotted with holes, allowing beams of moonlight to filter through. As he stepped inside, Alex noticed something peculiar. The shadows in this room seemed to move of their own accord, shifting and writhing as if alive. He blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but the shadows continued their eerie dance. A sense of dread washed over him, and he felt an overwhelming urge to turn back. But his determination to uncover the truth kept him rooted to the spot. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the ward. Alex whipped around, his flashlight revealing a door at the far end that had slammed shut. He took a deep breath and made his way towards it, each step feeling heavier than the last. The door was labeled Doctor's Office. With a shaky hand, he turned the knob and entered. The office was surprisingly intact compared to the rest of the asylum. A large wooden desk dominated the room, covered in old papers, books, and strange instruments. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty tomes and jars containing what looked like medical specimens. Alex approached the desk and began to sift through the papers. Most of them were medical reports and patient files, but one document stood out. It was a handwritten journal, its cover worn and faded. Alex opened it and began to read. The entries detailed the experiences of Dr. Harold Blackwood, the head physician of the asylum. As Alex read, he felt a chill run down his spine. The journal spoke of unethical experiments, cruel treatments, and strange occurrences that plagued the asylum. Dr. Blackwood wrote about shadows that seemed to have a mind of their own, tormenting both patients and staff. One entry caught Alex's attention. November 3rd, 1932, the shadows are growing more aggressive. They whisper to me, taunting and threatening. I fear they are not mere figments of imagination, but something far more sinister. I must find a way to contain them before it's too late. Alex's heart pounded as he read the final entry. December 15th, 1932, I have failed. The shadows have taken control. They feed on fear and despair. This place is cursed, and all who enter are doomed. If anyone finds this journal, beware the shadows. They are alive, and they will consume you. A cold sweat broke out on Alex's forehead. He looked around the room, feeling the weight of Dr. Blackwood's words. The shadows in the asylum were not just a figment of the imagination. They were real, and they were dangerous. The realization hit him hard, and he felt a surge of panic. He needed to get out, and he needed to do it now. But as he turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The room plunged into darkness, and Alex could feel the shadows closing in around him. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind with terror. He was trapped, and there was no escape. Trapped in the dark, Alex's mind raced as he struggled to calm his breathing. He fumbled for his flashlight, finally managing to switch it back on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the room's sinister contents once more. The shadows seemed to retreat, but Alex could still feel their presence, watching and waiting. Determined to find a way out, Alex moved cautiously toward the door. He reached for the handle, only to feel a cold, invisible force push him back. It was as if the shadows themselves were blocking his escape. Panic surged through him, but he fought to keep his composure. There had to be another way. Turning back to the desk, Alex rummaged through the papers and books, searching for any clue that might help him. Among the clutter, he found an old map of the asylum, yellowed and fragile. The map showed the layout of the building, including a network of tunnels beneath the main structure. Alex's eyes widened with hope. If he could find a way into those tunnels, he might be able to escape. The map indicated that the entrance to the tunnels was located in the basement. Alex's heart sank at the thought of descending even deeper into the asylum's darkness, but he knew he had no choice. With the map clutched tightly in his hand, he left the doctor's office and headed back into the main ward. As he moved through the ward, the shadows seemed to follow, lurking just out of reach of his flashlight's beam. Alex forced himself to focus, using the map to navigate through the labyrinth and hallways. He passed rooms filled with broken furniture, rusted medical equipment, and disturbing remnants of the asylum's past. In one room, he found a row of old patient beds, each with leather straps meant to restrain the occupants. The sight sent a shiver down his spine, and he hurried past, trying not to imagine the suffering that had occurred there. Another room contained shelves lined with dusty jars, each holding preserved specimens that seemed to stare at him with lifeless eyes. Finally, Alex reached the staircase leading down to the basement. The steps were narrow and steep, disappearing into the inky blackness below. He took a deep breath and started his descent, each step creaking under his weight. The air grew colder and damper, carrying a faint, musty smell that made him wrinkle his nose. At the bottom of the stairs, Alex found himself in a long, narrow hallway. The walls were lined with pipes that groaned and hissed, and the floor was slick with moisture. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The basement felt even more oppressive than the upper floors, as if the darkness itself was alive and closing in on him. Following the map, Alex navigated the twisting corridors until he reached a heavy metal door marked tunnels. He hesitated for a moment, then grasped the handle and pulled. The door groaned open, revealing a steep, narrow staircase descending into the earth. The air that wafted up was cold and stale, sending a shiver through Alex's body. With one last look at the basement hallway, he started down the staircase. The walls closed in around him, and the darkness grew thicker. His flashlight struggled to penetrate the gloom, and he felt a growing sense of dread with each step. The shadows seemed to cling to him, whispering faintly in his ears, but he pressed on. At the bottom of the stairs, Alex found himself in a low-ceilinged tunnel. The air was damp and musty, and the walls were covered in moss and mold. His flashlight flickered again, and he banged it against his palm, trying to keep it from going out. The shadows here were more insistent, pressing in from all sides. As he moved through the tunnel, Alex came across strange symbols and markings on the walls. They seemed ancient and otherworldly, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were a warning. He quickened his pace, eager to find an exit. The tunnel twisted and turned, each bend revealing more of the same damp, dark passageway. Finally, Alex saw a faint light ahead. He hurried toward it, hope surging in his chest. The light grew brighter, and he soon found himself standing at the edge of a large, open chamber. The chamber was lit by a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows. In the center of the chamber was a large, circular hole, surrounded by more of the strange symbols. Alex approached cautiously, peering into the darkness below. A ladder led down into the pit, and he could hear the faint sound of running water. The map indicated that this was the way out, but something about the hole filled him with a deep sense of dread. He steeled himself and started down the ladder. The rungs were slick with moisture, and he had to move carefully to avoid slipping. The sound of water grew louder as he descended, echoing off the walls of the pit. Finally, he reached the bottom and found himself in a narrow, underground stream. The water was icy cold, and it flowed swiftly around his ankles. Alex waded through the stream, following it as it wound through the tunnels. The air was damp and heavy, and the shadows seemed to close in tighter. His flashlight flickered once more, and he prayed it wouldn't go out completely. As he rounded a bend, Alex saw a faint light ahead. He hurried toward it, hope surging once more. The light grew brighter, and he soon found himself standing at the mouth of the tunnel. The stream flowed out into the open air, and Alex could see the stars shining above. He climbed out of the tunnel, breathing in the fresh night air. Relief washed over him as he stood there, soaked and shivering but alive. He had escaped the asylum, but he knew the shadows would haunt him forever. The asylum of shadows had left its mark, and he would never forget the horrors he had witnessed. As Alex stood under the starry sky, catching his breath, he realized that simply escaping the asylum wasn't enough. He needed to understand what he had encountered, to make sense of the terror that had nearly consumed him. With renewed determination, he decided to return home and research more about the asylum's dark history. Back in his room, Alex pored over old newspaper clippings and internet articles. The deeper he delved, the more horrifying the story became. The asylum had a notorious reputation for cruel and unusual treatments, but there were darker secrets buried beneath its foundation. He found accounts of patients disappearing without a trace and stories of supernatural occurrences reported by the asylum staff. One article caught Alex's attention. It was an interview with a former nurse, Margaret, who had worked at the asylum in its final days before it was shut down. According to her, the shadows that haunted the asylum were not mere figments of imagination, but were believed to be manifestations of the tormented souls trapped within the building. The interview mentioned a specific incident involving Dr. Harold Blackwood, the head physician whose journal Alex had found. Margaret described Dr. Blackwood as a brilliant but deeply troubled man. His obsession with curing mental illness led him down a dark path of experimental treatments that bordered on torture. It was rumored that he had discovered a way to tap into a patient's subconscious mind, bringing their deepest fears and traumas to life. These experiments, however, had unintended consequences. Instead of curing the patients, they unleashed a malevolent force that fed on fear and despair. Determined to learn more, Alex decided to track down Margaret and speak to her directly. After a few days of searching, he found her living in a small town nearby. She was an elderly woman now, her eyes still haunted by the memories of the asylum. She was reluctant to talk at first, but Alex's sincerity and desperation convinced her to share her story. Margaret recounted how, in the final days of the asylum, the atmosphere had grown increasingly oppressive. Patients and staff alike reported seeing shadows moving independently, whispering in the dark. The shadows seemed to have a life of their own, driven by a hunger for fear. Dr. Blackwood had become reclusive, locking himself in his office for days on end. When he finally emerged, he was a changed man, driven to the brink of madness by the very forces he had unleashed. The shadows, she whispered, her voice trembling, they were the embodiment of all the pain and suffering within those walls. They thrived on it, grew stronger with each passing day. Dr. Blackwood tried to contain them, but it was too late. The asylum itself had become a vessel for their darkness. Margaret explained that the only way to truly understand the shadows was to confront them at their source. She handed Alex an old, worn key. "This opens the hidden room beneath the asylum," she said. "It's where Dr. Blackwood conducted his final experiments. If you want answers, that's where you'll find them. But be warned, the shadows will not let you go easily." Armed with new information and a sense of purpose, Alex returned to the asylum. The building loomed ahead, even more menacing than before. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, retracing his steps through the dark hallways. The asylum seemed to come alive around him, the shadows whispering and shifting with a malevolent intent. Following the map and Margaret's directions, Alex made his way to a small, unmarked door in the basement. The key fit perfectly, and with a click, the door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Alex hesitated for a moment, then steeled himself and began his descent. The air grew colder as he went deeper, the shadows closing in around him. At the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves filled with strange instruments and jars containing unidentifiable substances. In the center of the room was a large table, covered in old papers and a single, flickering candle. As Alex approached the table, he noticed a journal lying open. It was Dr. Blackwood's, detailing his final, desperate attempts to understand and contain the shadows. The entries were frantic, the handwriting shaky and erratic. Dr. Blackwood wrote of his growing fear and paranoia, of the shadows whispering his darkest secrets and preying on his deepest fears. One entry stood out. December 20th, 1932. The shadows have grown too powerful. They are no longer bound by the confines of the asylum. They feed on fear and despair, growing stronger with each passing day. I fear there is no way to stop them. They are the embodiment of all the suffering within these walls, and they will not rest until they have consumed everything. As Alex read the final entry, the room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around him. He felt a presence behind him, and turned to see a dark, amorphous figure standing in the doorway. The shadow seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its form shifting and writhing as if alive. Alex backed away, his heart pounding. The shadow moved closer, its whispering filling his mind with fear and despair. He could feel its cold touch, seeping into his skin, sapping his strength. Desperate, he grabbed the journal and held it up as a shield. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering and retreating. In a moment of clarity, Alex realized that the shadows were tied to the journal, to the memories and suffering recorded within its pages. He knew what he had to do. Gathering all his strength, he hurled the journal into the flickering candle flame. The pages caught fire, the flames quickly consuming the journal. The shadow let out a piercing wail, its form dissolving into the darkness. The room grew warmer, and the oppressive weight lifted from Alex's chest. The shadows retreated, their whispers fading into silence. Alex collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. He had faced the darkness and survived. As the flames died down, Alex realized that the asylum was silent. The shadows were gone, their malevolent presence banished. He knew that the asylum's dark history could never be erased, but he had put an end to its reign of terror. With a heavy heart, he made his way back up the stairs and out of the asylum, vowing never to return. The cold night air outside the asylum offered little comfort to Alex. He felt the weight of the asylum's dark secrets pressing on him, and the shadows' whispers still echoed in his mind. His brief triumph over the shadows with Dr. Blackwood's journal had given him hope, but he knew the battle was far from over. Determined to put an end to the terror once and for all, Alex gathered supplies, a few flashlights, batteries, and a small, portable fire starter. He knew that fire seemed to repel the shadows, and he needed every advantage he could get. Armed with these tools, he steeled himself for the final confrontation and re-entered the asylum. The building greeted him with an oppressive silence, the air thick with the promise of impending horror. He navigated through the dark hallways, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The asylum felt more alive than ever, as if the walls themselves were watching him. Shadows moved just out of sight, taunting him with their elusive presence. Alex headed back to the main ward, where he had first encountered the strange, shifting shadows. The large open space was even more foreboding now, with shadows stretching and twisting in the dim light. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves, and stepped inside. As soon as he did, the temperature dropped, and the whispers began anew. "Alex." The voices called, echoing around the room. "Why do you resist? You cannot escape us." Ignoring the whispers, Alex focused on finding any clues that might help him. He moved from bed to bed, searching through the debris and old medical equipment. The shadows seemed to grow agitated, their forms becoming more distinct and menacing. They coiled around him, reaching out with tendrils of darkness that sent chills down his spine. Near the center of the ward, Alex found another door he hadn't noticed before. It was partially hidden behind a tattered curtain, and the word "chapel" was barely visible above it. Intrigued, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The chapel was a stark contrast to the rest of the asylum. The walls were adorned with religious symbols, and the room was bathed in a soft, ethereal light. Despite the decay, there was an air of solemnity and peace. At the front of the chapel, an old altar stood, covered in dust and cobwebs. On the altar lay a large, ancient book, its leather cover cracked and worn. Alex approached the altar, feeling a strange sense of reverence. He carefully opened the book, revealing pages filled with handwritten notes and drawings. It appeared to be a journal, much like Dr. Blackwood's, but this one belonged to a priest who had served at the asylum. The journal detailed the priest's efforts to combat the growing darkness within the asylum. He wrote of the shadows, describing them as fallen spirits drawn to the suffering and despair of the patients. The priest had performed countless rituals and exorcisms, but the shadows were relentless, feeding off the negative energy and growing stronger. One entry stood out to Alex. October 31st, 1932. The shadows are unlike any evil I have encountered. They thrive on fear and misery, feeding off the tormented souls within these walls. I have discovered a ritual that may contain their power, but it requires great sacrifice. The symbols must be drawn in blood, and the incantations must be spoken with absolute conviction. The shadows will resist, but this may be our only hope. As Alex read the priest's words, he realized what he had to do. He needed to perform the ritual described in the journal to contain the shadows once and for all. The idea of drawing symbols in blood and facing the shadows head-on terrified him, but he knew there was no other way. Armed with the knowledge from the journal, Alex made his way back to the main ward. The shadows were more aggressive now, their forms swirling and coiling around him. He felt their icy touch, heard their whispers grow louder and more insistent. They were aware of his intentions and would stop at nothing to prevent him from succeeding. Alex knelt in the center of the ward and began to draw the symbols on the floor, using a small knife to prick his finger and let his blood flow. The shadows surged forward, their whispers turning into screams of rage. He forced himself to concentrate, carefully recreating the intricate patterns described in the journal. As he worked, the room grew darker, the shadows closing in around him. He could feel their hatred, their hunger for his fear. But he refused to give in. With each symbol completed, the shadows seemed to recoil, their forms flickering and growing weaker. Finally, the last symbol was drawn. Alex stood, blood dripping from his finger, and began to recite the incantations from the journal. The words felt strange and foreign on his tongue, but he spoke them with as much conviction as he could muster. The shadows screamed and writhed, their forms twisting in agony. The room shook, the very walls trembling as the power of the ritual took hold. Alex continued to chant, his voice growing stronger with each word. The shadows seemed to melt away, their dark forms dissolving into nothingness. The oppressive weight that had filled the room lifted, and the whispers faded into silence. When the final word was spoken, the ward was bathed in an eerie, calm light. The shadows were gone, banished by the power of the ritual. Alex collapsed to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. He had faced the darkness and won. As he lay there, catching his breath, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The asylum was still a place of horror and pain, but the malevolent force that had haunted its halls was gone. Alex knew that the shadows would never return, and that the souls trapped within the asylum were finally free. With a heavy heart, Alex made his way out of the asylum one last time. He stepped into the cool night air, feeling a sense of closure. The asylum of shadows would forever remain a dark chapter in his life, but he had conquered his fear and emerged stronger. As he walked away from the asylum, he felt a strange sense of relief. The shadows were gone, but their memory would linger, a reminder of the darkness that could exist within the human soul. Alex knew that he had faced something truly evil and had come out the other side stronger and wiser. And with that knowledge, he could finally move forward, leaving the shadows behind. Although Alex had banished the shadows from the asylum, the experience left him with an unsettling feeling. The victory felt hollow, as if the darkness had only retreated temporarily. Nightmares plagued him, and whispers of the shadows echoed in his mind. Determined to ensure the shadows were truly gone, he decided to delve deeper into the asylum's secrets. Alex returned to the asylum during daylight, hoping the presence of the sun would provide some comfort. The building was just as foreboding in the daylight, its walls casting long, ominous shadows. He steeled himself and stepped inside, the familiar sense of dread washing over him. This time, Alex headed straight for the records room. He needed to understand the full extent of Dr. Blackwood's experiments and the origins of the shadows. The room was filled with cabinets and boxes, overflowing with patient files, medical records, and old photographs. Alex began sifting through the documents, looking for anything that might shed light on the asylum's dark past. As he read through the files, a disturbing pattern emerged. Many of the patients had been subjected to horrific treatments designed to cure their mental illnesses. electroshock therapy, isolation, and experimental drugs were common. But there were also reports of more sinister practices, forced lobotomies, occult rituals, and attempts to summon otherworldly entities. Dr. Blackwood's name appeared frequently, his methods becoming increasingly desperate and unhinged. One file in particular caught Alex's attention. It belonged to a patient named William Hargrove, who had been admitted to the asylum in 1930. Hargrove claimed to be a medium able to communicate with spirits and see into other dimensions. Dr. Blackwood had taken a special interest in Hargrove, believing his abilities could unlock the secrets of the mind and provide a cure for madness. According to the records, Dr. Blackwood conducted numerous experiments on Hargrove, pushing him to the brink of sanity. The experiments seemed to focus on opening a gateway to another realm, one inhabited by dark and malevolent entities. Hargrove's condition deteriorated rapidly, and he eventually disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Alex felt a chill run down his spine as he read Hargrove's final words, scrawled hastily in the margins of his file. "The shadows are coming. They are not of this world. They hunger for our fear, our pain. They will consume us all." Determined to find more answers, Alex continued his search. He found an old photograph of Dr. Blackwood and his staff, taken in front of a door labeled Experimental Ward. The door was unlike any other in the asylum, heavily reinforced and marked with strange symbols. Alex realized this ward must hold the key to understanding the true nature of the shadows. Armed with the photograph and his newfound knowledge, Alex made his way to the experimental ward. The door was still intact, its symbols faded but still visible. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open and stepped inside. The ward was a stark contrast to the rest of the asylum. The walls were lined with strange, arcane symbols, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and other, less identifiable odors. Tables were covered with ancient texts, strange artifacts, and jars filled with unrecognizable substances. It was clear that Dr. Blackwood had been conducting more than just medical experiments here. In the center of the room, Alex found a large, ornate mirror. Its surface was dark and reflective, yet it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The frame was inscribed with the same symbols that adorned the walls, and Alex felt a strange pull toward it. As he approached, the air grew colder, and he could hear faint whispers emanating from the mirror. He reached out and touched the mirror's surface. Instantly, he was engulfed in darkness. The world around him disappeared, and he found himself standing in a vast, shadowy landscape. The ground was cold and unyielding, and the sky was a swirling mass of black clouds. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the whispers grew louder, filling his mind with fear and despair. Alex realized he had somehow entered the realm of the shadows. The landscape was a twisted reflection of the asylum, filled with dark, distorted versions of the rooms and hallways he had explored. The shadows here were more substantial, their forms shifting and writhing as they moved. As he ventured further into the shadow realm, Alex encountered nightmarish visions of the asylum's past. He saw patients writhing in agony, their bodies contorted by Dr. Blackwood's cruel experiments. He saw the staff driven to madness by the horrors they had witnessed. And he saw Dr. Blackwood himself, standing at the center of it all, his eyes filled with a manic gleam. Dr. Blackwood's voice echoed through the darkness, cold and cruel. "You cannot escape the shadows, Alex. They are a part of you now, as they are a part of me. We are bound to this place, forever haunted by our sins." Alex felt a surge of anger and determination. He would not let the shadows consume him. He had to find a way to break free from this realm and end the shadows' reign of terror once and for all. As he pressed on, he found a series of symbols etched into the ground, similar to those he had seen in the chapel and the experimental ward. They seemed to form a path, leading deeper into the shadow realm. Alex followed the symbols, his resolve strengthening with each step. The path led him to a large, open chamber, its walls covered in even more intricate and arcane symbols. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, much like the one in the chapel. But this altar was different. It pulsed with a dark energy, and the shadows seemed to writhe around it, drawn to its power. Alex approached the altar, his heart pounding. He could feel the shadows closing in, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. He knew he had to act quickly. Recalling the ritual from the priest's journal, he began to draw the symbols around the altar, using his own blood to complete the patterns. The shadows surged forward, their forms becoming more aggressive and tangible. Alex could feel their cold touch, their hunger for his fear. But he refused to let them break him. With each symbol completed, the shadows seemed to weaken, their forms flickering and fading. As he finished the last symbol, Alex stood before the altar and began to recite the incantations from the journal. The words echoed through the chamber, resonating with a power that seemed to push back the darkness. The shadows screamed and writhed, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The chamber shook, the very ground trembling beneath Alex's feet. He continued to chant, his voice growing stronger with each word. The shadows were being banished, their malevolent presence driven back into the void. With a final, resounding word, the ritual was complete. The chamber fell silent, and the oppressive weight lifted from Alex's chest. The shadows were gone, their power broken. Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him, knowing he had finally put an end to their reign of terror. As the darkness receded, Alex found himself back in the experimental ward, standing before the mirror. Its surface was now clear, reflecting only his own exhausted but triumphant face. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. With a sense of closure, Alex left the asylum for the last time. He knew the shadows were gone, but their memory would linger, a reminder of the darkness that could exist within the human soul. He had faced his fears and conquered them, emerging stronger and wiser. As he walked away from the asylum, the sun began to rise, casting its warm light over the landscape. The shadows were gone, but their lesson remained. No matter how dark the world may seem, there is always a way to fight back and reclaim the light. The days that followed Alex's victory over the shadows were far from peaceful. Though he had succeeded in banishing the malevolent entities, the scars of his experience lingered. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, haunted by memories of the shadow realm. His nightmares intensified, filled with visions of the asylum and the horrors it had contained. Alex realized that the shadows, though banished, had left a mark on his soul. Determined to find a lasting sense of peace, Alex sought help from those who might understand the nature of his ordeal. He visited libraries, spoke with historians, and reached out to paranormal experts. His journey led him to an old occultist named Eliza, who had a reputation for dealing with dark forces. She lived in a small, secluded cabin deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. Eliza welcomed Alex with a knowing look, as if she could see the shadows clinging to him. Her home was filled with ancient books, strange artifacts, and the scent of burning sage. She listened intently as Alex recounted his experiences at the asylum, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "You have done well to banish the shadows," Eliza said, her voice calm and steady. "But their influence remains. They are drawn to you now, like moths to a flame. To truly free yourself, you must sever their connection to this world." Alex felt a shiver of fear. "How do I do that?" Eliza handed him a small, ornate dagger and a vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. "You must return to the asylum and perform one final ritual. This dagger, consecrated in ancient rites, can cut through the ties that bind the shadows to you. The liquid is a potion that will protect your spirit during the ritual. Be warned, the shadows will fight back with everything they have left." Armed with Eliza's tools and guidance, Alex steeled himself for one last confrontation. As he approached the asylum, the building seemed to loom larger, its dark presence more oppressive than ever. He entered through the familiar, creaking doors, his flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Alex made his way to the chapel, knowing it was a place of power within the asylum. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to swirl around him, whispering threats and promises of despair. He could feel their malevolence growing, feeding off his fear. He approached the altar where he had found the priest's journal and set down the dagger and vial. The shadows grew more agitated, their whispers rising to a fever pitch. Alex took a deep breath, opened the vial, and drank the potion. It tasted bitter and cold, but he felt a warmth spread through his body, bolstering his courage. With the dagger in hand, Alex began to draw the symbols on the floor once more, using his own blood as ink. The shadows surged forward, their forms more solid and menacing. He could feel their cold touch, their hunger for his fear. But he refused to let them break him. As he completed the final symbol, Alex stood and faced the shadows. He raised the dagger, its blade gleaming in the dim light, and began to chant the incantations Eliza had taught him. The words felt powerful and ancient, resonating through the chapel and pushing back the darkness. The shadows screamed and writhed, their forms twisting in agony. Alex could feel their rage, their desperation. They lunged at him, their cold tendrils wrapping around his limbs, trying to drag him into the abyss. But the potion's protection held, and Alex continued to chant, his voice growing stronger with each word. With a final, defiant shout, Alex plunged the dagger into the center of the largest shadow. The blade cut through the darkness, severing the ties that bound the shadows to this world. A blinding light erupted from the altar, engulfing the chapel and banishing the shadows in a burst of pure energy. Alex was thrown back by the force of the explosion, hitting the ground hard. He lay there, gasping for breath, as the light faded and the chapel grew silent. The oppressive weight was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The shadows were truly gone, their connection to the world severed. As he struggled to his feet, Alex felt a sense of triumph and relief wash over him. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, free from the shadows' influence. He left the asylum for the final time, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The journey back to Eliza's cabin was a blur, but she greeted him with a warm smile. "You have done it, Alex. The shadows are no more." Alex nodded, feeling a deep gratitude. "Thank you, Eliza. I couldn't have done it without your help." She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You had the strength within you all along. The shadows feared you because they knew you had the power to defeat them. Now you are free." In the days that followed, Alex's nightmares ceased and the whispers faded into silence. He found a renewed sense of purpose, determined to use his experience to help others facing their own darkness. The asylum remained a dark chapter in his life, but it was one he had overcome. As the seasons changed, Alex visited the asylum one last time. The building was still and silent, the shadows gone. He stood before it, feeling a sense of closure and peace. The Asylum of Shadows had once been a place of fear and despair, but now it was just an empty shell, a relic of a dark past. Alex knew that the darkness within the human soul could be faced and conquered. He had learned that even in the deepest shadows, there was always a glimmer of light. And with that knowledge, he walked away, ready to embrace the future and the challenges it held. Alex left Eliza's cabin feeling a renewed sense of purpose and strength. He knew that he had overcome immense darkness and emerged victorious, but there was still a lingering question in his mind. Was the asylum truly free from its sinister grip, or had he merely pushed the shadows back temporarily? He needed to ensure that the asylum's curse was lifted for good. Determined to find closure, Alex decided to return to the asylum one last time. This time, he went prepared with more than just a flashlight and his resolve. He carried a bag filled with supplies, including candles, protective charms given by Eliza, and a detailed map of the asylum's underground tunnels that he had found during his research. The sun was setting as Alex approached the asylum, casting long shadows across the ground. The building loomed ahead, its dark silhouette stark against the twilight sky. He felt a familiar chill as he stepped inside, but he pushed the fear aside, reminding himself that he had faced worse and survived. Alex headed straight for the basement, using the map to navigate the labyrinthine tunnels. He reached the hidden room beneath the asylum where Dr. Blackwood had conducted his final experiments. The room felt colder than the rest of the building, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. This was the heart of the asylum's darkness, where the shadows had been born. He placed the candles in a circle around the room, lighting them one by one. Their warm glow pushed back the darkness, casting flickering shadows on the walls. He then arranged the protective charms in a pattern that Eliza had shown him, designed to create a barrier against any malevolent forces. Alex stood in the center of the circle and took a deep breath. He began to recite the incantations Eliza had taught him, his voice steady and strong. The air seemed to hum with energy, and the room grew warmer as the power of the ritual took hold. The shadows that lingered in the corners of the room writhed and twisted, but they could not penetrate the protective barrier. As he chanted, Alex felt a strange sensation, as if he were being watched. He opened his eyes and saw a figure standing at the edge of the circle. It was Dr. Blackwood, his face twisted with rage and despair. The doctor's form flickered like a shadow, but his presence was undeniable. "You think you can banish us so easily, Doctor?" Blackwood's voice was a harsh whisper, filled with malice. "The shadows are part of this place. They are part of me. You cannot destroy what you do not understand." Alex met Dr. Blackwood's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I understand more than you think," he replied. "I know the shadows are born of fear and suffering, and I know that I have the power to end this." With a final, defiant shout, Alex completed the incantation. The room shook, and the candles' flames burned brighter, their light searing through the darkness. "Doctor!" Blackwood screamed, his form dissolving into a cloud of shadow that was quickly consumed by the light. The shadows in the room writhed and twisted, their whispers turning to screams as they were pulled into the light and vanished. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him. He knew that the asylum's curse had been broken. The shadows were gone, and Dr. Blackwood's malevolent presence had been banished. Exhausted but triumphant, Alex made his way out of the asylum. The first light of dawn was breaking as he stepped outside, casting a golden glow over the landscape. He felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known in a long time. The asylum, once a place of fear and despair, was now just an empty building, its power broken. In the weeks that followed, Alex found that his nightmares had ceased, and the whispers of the shadows no longer haunted him. He spent time reflecting on his experience, understanding that he had faced a deep and ancient darkness and emerged stronger for it. He knew that the world still held many mysteries and dangers, but he also knew that he had the courage and strength to face them. Alex decided to share his story with others, hoping to provide comfort and inspiration to those who faced their own darkness. He wrote about his journey, detailing the horrors he had encountered and the strength he had found within himself. His story resonated with many, offering hope and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way to find the light. The asylum was eventually torn down, and in its place, a memorial garden was created. It became a place of reflection and healing, a symbol of the triumph of light over darkness. Alex visited the garden often, finding solace in its peaceful beauty. As he stood among the flowers, he felt a sense of closure. The asylum of shadows was no more, but its lessons remained. Alex knew that he had faced his fears and conquered them, emerging stronger and wiser. And with that knowledge, he was ready to embrace whatever the future held. The shadows had tested him, but he had proven that courage and determination could overcome even the darkest of evils. Alex's journey had been one of fear and despair, but it had also been one of hope and triumph. He had learned that no matter how dark the world may seem, there is always a way to fight back and reclaim the light. Years passed, and Alex's life settled into a calm, steady rhythm. The Asylum of Shadows became a distant memory, a chapter of his life that he rarely revisited. He found fulfillment in helping others who struggled with their own fears and darkness, drawing on his experiences to guide and support them. The memorial garden, where the asylum once stood, flourished. It became a sanctuary for the community, a place where people came to reflect, remember, and find peace. Alex often visited the garden, tending to the flowers and talking with visitors about the importance of facing one's fears. One bright spring morning, as Alex was planting new flowers in the garden, a young boy approached him. The boy looked to be about 12 years old, with wide, curious eyes and a shy smile. He carried a worn book in his hands, its cover faded but recognizable. It was Alex's book, the one he had written about his journey through the asylum. "Are you Alex?" the boy asked, his voice trembling with excitement. Alex nodded, smiling warmly. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The boy's eyes lit up. "I read your book. It was amazing. I couldn't believe what you went through. I wanted to come here and see the garden for myself." Alex's heart swelled with pride. "I'm glad you liked the book. This garden is a very special place." The boy looked around, taking in the beauty of the flowers and the tranquility of the surroundings. Do you think the shadows are really gone?" Alex knelt down to the boy's level, looking him in the eye. "I do. The shadows were a manifestation of fear and pain, and we've transformed this place into one of hope and healing. The shadows can't return here." The boy nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I want to be brave, like you. I want to help people, too." Alex placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You can. Being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about facing your fears and doing what's right, even when it's hard. You have that bravery inside you." As the boy ran off to explore the garden, Alex watched him with a sense of fulfillment. The asylum's dark legacy had been transformed into something positive, a place where future generations could find strength and inspiration. Alex stood up and continued his work, feeling a deep sense of peace. The shadows had once held him in their grip, but he had broken free and turned their darkness into light. He knew that life would always have its challenges, but he also knew that he had the courage to face them. The garden blossomed under the warm spring sun, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Alex's journey had come full circle, from the depths of the asylum's darkness to the bright, hopeful future that lay ahead. He had faced his fears, conquered the shadows, and emerged stronger. And with that strength, he continued to move forward, ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that the light within him would always shine.